Hello and welcome to the Mental Health Advantage podcast, where HR, benefits, and total rewards leaders explore the future of workplace well-being. I'm your host, Sokoler, founder and CEO of Journey, the leading proactive mental health solution for modern companies. In each episode, we bring you expert insights, real-world strategies, and candid conversations on creating healthier, more productive workplaces. Make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. Now let's dive in. Hello, everybody. Today I'm joined by KJ Payette, an accomplished HR executive and now partner at Revelares and principal at Thrive Point Consulting, where she helps companies and leaders reimagine how work can actually support people's lives, not the other way around. Her experience spans Panera, where KJ and I first met, CVS, and Cumberland Farms. And today we're diving into what real well-being at work looks like and why empowerment and boundaries are central to making it happen. How you doing, KJ?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background? How did we end up here today?
Sure. So I got my undergraduate degree from Stanford University. And when I left Stanford, I joined a consulting organization. And they were just starting their change management practice. And it very closely aligned with my passion and energy. So I had the privilege of being part of that new organization. And then I took what I learned there into several organizations you mentioned. I was at CVS for over 20 years in a variety of roles, but always really anchored and focused on change and helping individuals and organizations thrive and be resilient through change. After CVS, I went to Cumberland Farms and then finished my corporate America career at Panera. So here I am today.
So you're done. No more corporate America, huh?
At least for right now.
I can appreciate that. I would assume the work-life balance, work-life integration is probably much nicer now than when running, people in HR at one of those big global organizations.
Yeah, I was very fortunate. I've always loved the work that I've done and had the opportunity for real impact. I think now it's about really choosing where I put my energy and things that I'm really passionate about.
I love that. So you spent years coaching people who were burned out, stuck, unfulfilled. What's one story that captures why empowerment and boundaries matter so much in the workplace?
Great question. Probably what comes to mind is a peer executive of mine, and this is quite a long time ago. And she came in one morning and we were talking, and she started to tell me a story about that the CEO had called her in the middle of the night with an issue. And she was more focused on the issue. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. The CEO called you at 2:00 in the morning and you answered your phone? And she said, yes, we kind of have this agreement. And I was horrified. And at the time, she was struggling with some health issues, including weight and infertility. She had some family and personal issues going on. And she was really struggling. And this was probably not my finest coaching moment, but I kind of said to her, like, you got to stop. You can't have the CEO calling you in the middle of the night. There's nothing that can't wait until the next morning. So it was just a really impactful interaction for me about what not to do.
Yeah, well, often our best teachers are exactly that. I know that from my first boss when I graduated from school did so many things that were extremely demotivating. And I've generally taken the business philosophy of like people come in already motivated. And so it's not about how do we light that fire and how do we motivate them, but how do we not put obstacles and blockers in the way that actually moves them in the opposite direction. So let's talk a little bit about mental health. Why do you think so many companies still treat mental health as a nice to have versus a true business imperative?
I think there's a couple reasons. One is it's hard to have really data-driven information available. So in other parts of the business, you run a marketing campaign, you can measure it all day long. You invest in people, and it's hard to really see the results of that. I think secondly, for a lot of leaders still focusing on people and having compassion and the things that make people well feels a little soft. And leaders don't necessarily want to be perceived as soft.
I think that's part of it for sure. So you've said in the past that companies need to step up, not just because it's right, but because it's better for business. And I preach that all the time when I'm talking to clients. I'm saying, don't do this because you think it's the right thing to do, although that's obviously important. Do it because it's actually going to impact the business. So tell us a little bit more about, your thoughts on that.
There is data-driven research that shows that organizations who have employees who are more highly engaged deliver better business results. And I was fortunate to work at an organization where we could do the linkage analysis and we could prove that internally with our own data. So it's really important to understand that it's not just about, hey, this feels like the right thing to do and take care of people. When you build an organization where people are engaged and thriving, it actually produces better business outcomes. And I'm talking more now, Stephen, about engagement, not necessarily overall well-being, but engagement, and I'll call it career well-being or work well-being, is actually most highly correlated with overall life well-being. And so we spend a ton of time at work, and it's really important that our work, we feel connected and we have relationships and we're able to have real impact. So I think when organizations understand and really truly buy into that connection and that link, it creates amazing business outcomes.
Yep. And that's to your point, that's been proven in study after study.
Absolutely.
And so what shifts when well-being's embedded into the culture rather than simply a random benefit that sits off in left field?
Yeah. I think it becomes the whole DNA of the organization. When you talk about culture is really the way work gets done. And I used to always joke and say, it's the way people work when they think no one is looking. And so when well-being, when employee care and compassion is really integrated into the organization, it's not a special program. It's not a one-off for somebody who needs an accommodation. It's the way work gets done. And I think it becomes a flywheel, right? So people are more energized, they're more resourceful, they're more creative, they find solutions to problems more quickly, and that has the organization thriving. And they talk about what it's like to work there and how they feel. So people who are there want to stay. And when they're looking to bring people into the organization, they can attract great talent. So it's just a flywheel of results.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. We talk a lot about how do you embed it into the culture so that it's not simply just a random thing that's somewhere, right? But how do you have senior leaders buying into the idea that mental health is important? How do you disseminate that information? How do you make it part of recruiting and onboarding and promoting and the whole process, the whole employee experience there? Let's talk a little bit about empowerment as a leadership tool. So empowered people build thriving organizations. They're unlocked to be able to do their best work. What does real empowerment look like in the workforce?
Yeah, I think for me, empowerment really comes down to a couple of things: decision-making and choice, respect, and constructive communication. So when I say decision-making and choice, I think it's about trusting people that they have the skills and capabilities and desire to do the work, and then allowing them to do the work in a way that's authentic to them. So, I've had many examples over the years where somebody was assigned to a project and I was like, ooh, that's not necessarily the way I would do it. And I'd be a little worried and be a little anxious. But I learned over time that when people are really able to bring their full self to work, the results are usually great. And so having that trust in people and allowing them to do the work in the way that is meaningful to them becomes very fulfilling for that individual. So I think that's a really key part of empowerment. I think it's also about choice. We all lead busy, hectic lives. And when I can do my work in a way and at a time that supports and enables other parts of my life, it's even more fulfilling. And in a lot of ways, people become more committed. And then respect and communication are key. Respect for me is just the bedrock. It's about, human interactions, and it should always be present. And communication is the way that empowerment can happen, because I'm having healthy, constructive dialogue. We're sharing ideas. I can, set up boundaries or constraints or whatever is required and bring it to life in a way that's really fruitful. So I know I said a lot there, but I think it really is about individuals being able to steer their own path.
And you talked about communication in there. How do you help employees and perhaps even more importantly, leaders define and communicate boundaries, whether that's at work or at home or sort of holistically?
Yeah. And you said the two important things. It's both the individual and the organization. So at an individual level, I think it's about helping individuals know thyself, right? You have to really know your own values, understand what are the things that are like, no, I'm not crossing that line. My energy, when is my energy greatest? When is it weakest? When do I feel most creative and most resourceful? When do I struggle more? And what are my values? And when am I acting in congruence with those values? And if individuals don't know or aren't comfortable kind of sharing those things about themselves, it's really going to be hard for them to feel empowered. On the flip side, I think organizations need to create the culture and the environment for true listening. When an associate employee comes and talks to a leader in the organization, that leader has to really hear and see that person and not just process it through their own filter. And I think one of the things that's challenging about well-being is individual to each person. And so it's not a big corporate program that we can roll out and everybody's going to do well-being. It's one size fits one. And for you, Stephen, working 20 hours a day might feel like the right thing. It might feel fulfilling. It might give you energy. It might be exactly what you need to be thriving. For me, 20 hours a day might be total burnout. And so if we're in a boss-associate relationship and you expect me to work 20 hours, it's not going to work. If on the flip side, you work, 20 hours a couple of days and then need a big block of time to recharge, and I don't allow for that, it's also not going to be healthy. So I think it comes down most effectively to that conversation. There are things that organizations can do systematically to help, and I think some of this emerged after COVID when people were working at home and they were on Zoom and they were sitting in their chairs for long periods of time. And we did a lot of these at Panera. We changed our technology so that when you scheduled a 1-hour meeting, it defaulted to 50 minutes to end the meeting. When you did a half-hour meeting, it defaulted to 25 minutes. And that was to give people little breaks and little opportunities to move. We set Friday afternoons aside for, you could have meetings, but meetings that you wanted to have with other people who wanted to have them with you, not big corporate, the CEO was calling a strategy meeting at 2:00 on a Friday. We made some of those changes. We even put in some well-being and mental health time that people could take to recharge and come back to work more energized, more creative.
Thanks for listening to the first half of the episode. I hope you're walking away with some valuable insights. I want to take a quick pause to tell you about my book, The Mental Health Advantage. If you found this conversation useful, you'll find 300 more pages packed with strategies, insights, and real-world applications. Grab your copy on Amazon. Just check the show notes for the link. And if you're looking for a more comprehensive mental health solution for your company, let's chat. You'll find another link in the show notes to reach out and explore how Journey can help you. Now back to the show. So I'm going to take this opportunity to get some free consulting since we have you here on the podcast. So we are a company that is growing really quickly. That is not limited to us. There's lots of companies that are growing really quickly. We are a small but mighty startup servicing, many of the best companies in the world. We just launched the company yesterday, 27,000 employees. So not our largest by employee count, but they're in 70 countries. And we want to provide really exceptional support around the world for these folks. And while we staff the best we can, it's not something where it's a 9 to 5. And we communicate this very clearly up front. We let employees know you have full flexibility to work whenever you want. Nobody really is going to monitor you in that way. I mean, obviously there's, certain hours that are more core than others when others are, online, but regardless, it's like put your family first, do that, but there's just a lot of work. And what I find is that during the interview process, everybody says, yeah, that's what I want. That's what I want. But then when you actually start, it's, oh, actually, that's maybe not what they want. So again, turning this podcast into my own free advice session, what would you recommend for us as a company?
Well, first, I want to say congratulations. The growth in your company is amazing. And I've loved, talking to you about it along the way, but just to see it coming to life. So very well-deserved kudos. I think, in terms of recommendation, it sounds like you're doing all the right things up front. You're talking to people about it. You're being really clear about the demands and the expectations. It's hard without knowing more about what's really happening after people get there. And sometimes I find it's about prioritization. And especially in a small company that's growing really quickly, there's always more work than any one individual can do in the number of hours available to do that work. And so what I find is that when the organization has really, really clear priorities, these are 2 or 3, everybody's all in, everybody knows those are the 2 or 3 big things, that's really, really helpful. Because in the absence of that clarity, employees will make choices on their own, and they may or may not be making choices about the things that are most important. And then they'll start to feel disconnected, like, someone's following up on this and I didn't work on that. So I think the big priorities are really important. And then I think individual ongoing dialogue. So checking in at a week, a month, and saying, how's it going? What's working? What's not working? What are you struggling with? It's the same kind of dialogue that we all would want to have around our own well-being in any facet of our life. It can feel hard when it's really busy and there's a lot going on. Managers may be focusing more on, I've got this deliverable, I've got this thing to do, and kind of forgetting that helping people on board and get their feet under them and start to have some wins and feel successful is really key to retention.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if I really answered your question, and we can definitely go deeper.
You did, because I'll tell you one area that we struggle with, and I know this is true, companies big and small, is prioritization. There's so much to do, and it's often unclear what's the absolute mission critical thing right now, and what are the 5 other things that are important but not urgent, or maybe actually not even important at all. So I think that's a good takeaway for me. So thank you for that. All right, now back to our regularly scheduled program. Let's talk about leading with humanity, something I know you're super passionate about. So how can HR leaders intervene early and build cultures that prioritize psychological safety and sustainability? And I'll expand the question, not just to HR leaders, but to leaders in general, managers up and down throughout the organization.
I think it starts at the top of the organization. And organizations have to be really clear and honest about what they believe and what they're willing to do. So just like I said earlier, know thyself about an individual, know your own values. It's true of organizations as well. So I think for HR leaders, if you're a new chief people officer coming in, and I did this in my organizations, I started with the executive team and just said, what do you believe to be true about how work should get done and what's important, and how should we set the values of the organization? How do we bring those values to life? I think the worst thing an organization can do, Stephen, is put values on a poster and then have a meeting and say, this is what our values are and this is what we believe. and then behave in a way that's inconsistent with that. So it's a lot of hard work to get leaders to honestly and authentically say, this is what we believe and this is the way we want to lead and set the culture in the organization. And then you have to periodically check in. So I'll share a story. As a chief people officer, I would facilitate and create. I was often the one communicating to the organization, these are the things that we're going to do. And I gave you some examples. We're going to set meetings so that they're only 50 minutes. So you have a 10-minute break. And over time, I would start to hear stories from people about, yeah, KJ, they only do that when you're in the meeting. Or, they run 60 minutes instead of 50 minutes. And so we're not really getting the break. And I would call the executive team back together and say, okay, we can stop doing this. This doesn't have to be our practice, but we can't go out and say we're going to do it and then not do it. So it was almost like having to kind of periodically refresh. And then I think at the end of the day, it comes down to working with layers of leaders below the executive team and infusing those values, infusing the expectations, and really being people-centric. We all want to be in a place, we want to be in relationships where we feel seen and heard, and creating the space for that. So whether it's the CEO talking to his or her direct reports, or it's a newly promoted new manager talking to his or her direct reports, it's about that interaction. And we need to make sure that that's an expectation of leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. Walking the walk, for sure. Would you say HR leaders trying to build a culture that embraces transition and change? How do you teach people to actually welcome that as opposed to fear it?
Mm-hmm. There's decades of research on the way humans respond to change. And for many people, I think change initially sparks discomfort and fear, partly because it's the unknown, right? So we all grow up and we're afraid of the dark. You can't see what's out in front of you. It's unknown. It's scary. So change is a little bit like that. And if we help people through communication move effectively kind of through the process of change, it actually can become a differentiator. So people have very predictable, first it's about me. What does this mean for me? Am I not going to be able to do it in the new world? What if I'm not sitting with my same team? So you have to be prepared to announce the change in a way where people can understand why it's happening, give them the whys, give them the information, and then work with people at an individual level. Once they start to feel like, okay, I can see why this is important and I can understand how it's going to affect me and I feel like I can handle that, then you start to move them up into what are the practical things, what are the business processes, what are the technical changes, what's the training that's going to be given. But it's really all about helping people answer their questions and concerns. And when they don't have information, they answer it themselves. They fill in the blanks. And most often it's with information that's not right and that isn't healthy for them to focus on. So I think it really comes down to communication and training. And again, as people experience it in a way that's positive and there's trust in the organization, it can start to get exciting and exhilarating. And for most of us in this day and age, it's kind of embrace change or be obsolete. And so leaning in and helping people do that is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. As we start to come to a close, a couple of questions. What's one workplace myth about well-being or performance that you'd love to debunk?
I think it's that, well-being is a project or a nice to do. Promoting well-being is a basic right, and it needs to be front and center.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. I think it goes back, for me at least, it goes back to where we started, that this is a nice to have. Or we're doing this because, KJ is a great person and she cares about our people. It's like, let's not care about that. Let's care about we're driving real business results. And that's the reason we're doing it. If it also, makes your heart sing that you're doing it because you want to support people, I love that, right? That's obviously why I started Journey. But let's talk about it as a real powerful business tool.
And if you kind of use the analogy, Stephen, of, an elite athlete, a marathoner, you have to take care of all aspects of your life. You have to, train physically, you have to train mentally, you have to have diet and nutrition, you have to have appropriate rest. Athletes, to be able to deliver performance at the level that elite athletes do, they have a very robust way of taking care of themselves. And in organizations, it's no different. It can't be just, the business strategy and we're going to, work 100 hours to deliver that. It won't work. You won't get the results.
Yep. I agree completely. All right. So what gives you hope? There's so much change now. AI and DEI was in and now it's out, and who knows what's going to happen, and different generations in the workplace and social and political unrest globally. What gives you hope about where workplace culture is headed?
I think for me, it's hope around, I get hope from where HR is in the organization. And so I think HR now perceived as a critical partner and enabler to the business. I think for most of history, HR was administrative. It was, if something goes wrong, if somebody needs a hug, go to HR. Now I think it's how do we fully think about and prepare the people in the organization to enable a business outcome and to be a part of the plan. And, AI is a great example. There's going to be a great leveling of access to information and access to tools and data. The real differentiator is going to come down to human judgment, human emotion, human interaction. And so I am just incredibly hopeful about where HR can sit at the center of an organization and a business strategy.
I love that. All right. So in closing, a couple of takeaways on my side, right? And you tell me what I missed, right? Employee well-being is not a perk, right? It's a business driver. Cultures that support humanity and boundaries outperform those that don't. Empowerment really starts there, right? Being able to say no, to log off, being honest with your limits isn't selfish, but actually is smart leadership. HR and leaders need to set the tone. Culture change can happen when leaders are modeling the behavior that they want to see, not simply, hey, that's good for you, but not good for me. And it's okay to step away, right? People aren't machines, and the healthiest organizations recognize that. Any other takeaways that you have for our listeners today?
I think maybe I'll plug your space a little bit. I think mental health as one of the pillars of well-being. So I always talked about kind of 5 pillars of well-being. There's physical health, emotional, mental health, social health, career health, and community. And I think there's still a huge gap in our country in mental health and resources for people who are struggling. And so I think as organizations sort of lean in and embrace that it's not just your physical, healthcare benefits that are important. It's also helping people have access to resources and services when they're struggling, whether that's inside the organization or through a partnership outside of the organization. That is really critical to the future. And I think There's a lot of unknowns around AI, and there's so much about it that's exciting, and there's a lot about it that's scary. And so I think people are going to struggle in new and different ways, and just organizations need to be ready for it.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that's a good place to leave this. KJ, thank you so much. Thanks for the work that you do, the work that you've always done. I know how hard you fight to shape organizational culture and to put mental health front and center. So thank you for doing that. Thanks for being a great friend and for sharing your perspective with everyone today.
Yeah, it was my pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. And I look forward to our continued conversations.
That's right. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a beautiful day. Thanks for spending this time with us. We know you're busy. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to subscribe to the Mental Health Advantage and leave a review. Thanks so much and have a beautiful day.